right, welcome back to the KrakCast news, everybody, as we head into the third week of June. Dr. Mike, if your birthday is this week, do you know what your astrological sign is? Josh?
Gemini.
It's Gemini. Are you you keep up with astrological sign stuff?
I wouldn't say keep up, but I kind of know how they work.
What are Gemini people like?
Two-faced.
They are.
It's the sign of the twins, and
Two-faced.
yes, I mean the thumbnail sketch of them is super charming and massively untrustworthy.
You've just insulted like
12 of the
what
population.
Is that, 8%, 8.5% of our audience, basically. Yeah. Something like that. Well, anyway.
And including family members, actually. Yeah.
Space exploration, but that's another thing.
What?
I just think Gemini program and space exploration, that's like my first association.
Not June.
Not June, no.
It's like end of May to like the third week of May to third week of June or something like that. Yeah. Okay, well, after that weird opening, let's head into the news this week. Lots of stuff to talk about,
What's your sign?
but we're all over the map here. I mean, we've got weird stuff to talk about this week. Where should we start? Let's start with an animal theme. We had lots of animal news in Krakow this week. All of it strange. A few days ago, a carriage, the kind pulled by horses that we see in the center of town. A carriage was going down Spitalna Street, crossed onto Lubitsch, and was making its way to Plasmateki. The strange thing was there was no driver attached to the carriage, just the horses somehow.
So it wasn't a horseless carriage, it was a driverless carriage.
It was a driverless carriage, just like out of control. Thankfully, the Strażmejska, the police, were able to subdue the horses. I don't know how you do that.
Carrots.
They controlled them somehow. Nobody was hurt. Kind of funny, I guess. Again, nobody got hurt, so we can laugh about it. However, Dr. Mike, as you know, this is kind of like an annual thing here. There's always news of horses here in the Rynek, in Krakow, or sometimes in Zakopane, collapsing from the heat. Horses that are used to pull carriages and pull people, of course, collapsing from the heat, mistreatment and whatnot. And this incident in Krakow got the same reaction from animal rights people. They say it's a reminder that we shouldn't be using horses for our entertainment and our pleasure, et cetera, et cetera.
Be like the French and use them for food.
Where do you stand on this?
Horseshit. Let's be honest. If it wasn't for these kind of requirements, then we wouldn't have horses anymore right now. Joyriding is one of the main reasons people have horses anymore right now. It creates an industry. It creates, an attraction in town. And we're, of course, I don't want horses to be mistreated, whipped.
Nobody does. That's the whole. That's what the other side doesn't get. We don't want animals to be mistreated.
Animals to be treated well and humanely. But still, they're quote-unquote beasts of burden, which means we're going to use them for our needs. And I have no issue or problem with them being used to pull carriages with tourists around.
But still, we can ask some serious questions of whoever was supposed to be in charge of these horses, right?
But, when you have
they
these
should be responsible for,
I can see him, the horse rider, driver, I have no
carriage driver, guy, woman,
probably a technical
coachman,
yeah.
Postilion.
Getting everything ready in the morning and like a car driving by, a muffler going off, and the horse is getting spooked and just racing off before he's able to catch them, because apparently he was running after them and
zipping up his fly.
Oh, he's Welsh, but
keep going.
But apparently he got up to the Strażmejski and to the horses, like within a minute after this had happened. So, this was a very short incident. And I can see this happening. These are live animals.
These are big, strong animals that really, hard to control. Even if you work with them every day, they can do what they want. At the end, ultimately, you really can only hope that they kind of, listen to you when you ask them to stop running, I guess. Anyway, as I said, nobody hurt, no problems in the end. But again, the whole issue of how we use horses and if we should be using horses in this way has come back, and as I'm sure again it will at some point. When the heat turns up in July and August, unfortunately it happens almost every year. A horse, as I said, in the Rynek here in Krakow or somewhere in Zakopane collapses and sometimes dies, and we ask, we have the same conversation basically all the time. But that's
same is true with the odd tourist from time to time, of course.
I'm pretty sure more tourists die than horses every year.
Now there's an interesting one, isn't it?
I'm just going to continue with the news here. Lots of other animal stuff going on. In the north side of Krakow, it was on Dobrego Posterja, over there on the other side of Opolska, if you know where that is. A moose.
On Aqua Park, yeah.
Yeah, over there where Aqua Park is. A goddamn moose was running like along the street, not like in some back
I heard it was two moose.
No, just one moose. A single moose. Well,
All right. Sorry. So you carry on.
It was a moose. It was a moose. And from the pictures, it's either a female moose or a small juvenile male moose. I mean, moose can get like seriously huge, right? But this one was not so big, I guess.
And it didn't have the moose characteristic adornments on its head, did it?
But I don't think the males get those until they're a certain age. So the younger males don't have those.
And females don't have them at all.
I think. Let's not get into that. Not our special.
We don't really know much.
We don't know much about that at all. Anyway, it was a goddamn moose running along the street. Next to cars and whatnot. Moose. Moose. Even the small moose is.
We're not in Yellowstone for
250 kilo, 300 kilograms, 400. I don't know how much. I mean, you could do some damage really if it went into traffic. Fortunately, it did not. The moose was subdued by the cops, tranquilized, and thankfully relocated somewhere outside of the city, far away from people, where hopefully it will stay. We'll see. But if it's the edge of town or like a heavily wooded area, you could understand. But this is like fully developed, right? This is part of the concrete jungle of the city. How does a moose live or wander to a place like that?
This was early in the morning, so probably in the middle of the night he was walking around. And it got into the city, just got lost and kept going down a road because that's kind of like a natural game path in a way, 5-10 kilometers. And from being in the woods in the middle of the city, it's unusual.
So hold on. I mean, once you get out to the countryside, is moose encounter a kind of a frequent occurrence? I mean, are they like wild moose?
This is why this story is so interesting. That not only did it happen, but it happened kind of in the center.
I didn't even think they were like indigenous to the country anyway.
They are indigenous.
Maybe in Missouri, like up north, like in the Lake District, maybe they might be. But here, I mean, of all places, just bizarre. And they're not cute at all. I mean, let me take that back.
They're tasty,
let me take that back. Okay, they're cute, an animal, but what I'm saying, when you're face to face with one, and you see how big they are, and you see there's no barrier between you and them, suddenly you're not so interested in petting them and taking pictures. You just want to run for your life.
Well, this is kind of
enormous.
Famously why people liked buying Swedish cars back in the day, because they were built. Really, no. This is like they have
a lot of moose up there.
Moose test. They've got to be kind of because you crash into a moose. Obviously it'll hurt the moose a bit, but it will really seriously hurt your car.
Well, as I said, fortunately, no cars or moose hurt this time. The last part of our animal story trilogy, I don't know what to make of this. A woman called the Straż Miejska, which is the kind of the police force, because a local cat, a neighborhood cat, was threatening to kill. Not with words, but like through actions,
like pointing a gun at.
A cat was about to kill.
Make my day.
A cat was about to kill some baby squirrels. All right, so baby squirrels are kept in like the ground, I guess. Where do baby squirrels grow up?
In all this confusion, I kind of lost count.
So she calls the Straż Miejska, which raises the question, Josh, a question that I know has been...
Look, a squirrel!
That has been troubling Anglo jurisprudence for centuries, is that can a cat be held responsible for crimes against squirrels? Is this something for the cops to handle, or is this just nature doing what nature does?
I don't know. I think the fact that...
and no word if the cat was arrested or not. I'm not sure.
And I don't know what Straż Miejska is doing anyway, because they were also brought in, like, remember a few months ago when one of those bicycle delivery guys...
Was it Carol's cat?
...through a bunch of pigeons and
That's
killed
true. And they caught him very quickly.
So I think this is like the same thing. The Straż Miejska are going after easy targets or things that like positive...
Yeah, but do squirrels get police protection from cats?
I mean, do worms get police protection from, blackbirds?
Yeah, exactly.
Squirrels are cute. They're fun running around, but they're goddamn rodents. Funny thing is... I used to live in Chicago, a huge urban area in the middle of town. I'd see squirrels that are everywhere in like all little micro parks. Here, I see almost no squirrels. So I'm surprised at this story.
That's true. Yeah,
well, there's actually, interestingly, where I work in Podgorze, there's a big kind of car park actually next to the building, and there is. I think kind of to me as an Englishman, rather anomalously, there is respectively a red, a grey and a black squirrel that all seem to live there. You don't see them hanging out together, but you do see them.
I thought they had their own territories.
Well, yeah, it's kind of...
They don't get along. They don't get along.
Yeah.
All right, let's leave the animals behind us. Let's go to let's go to some economic news here. Interesting story this week. A survey out asking Polish people, do you think you belong to the middle class? Yes or no, and what income level makes you middle class in Poland? Now, interesting results here because about a third, 35% of the people who responded to the survey say that they're middle class, right? And the average salary attached with being in the middle class was between 4,000 and 6,000 zlotys. starting at 4, right? Which is, what's the minimum wage now? 2,800, something like that.
Just under 3,000.
It's not, 4,000, not so far from the minimum wage. Now, I wasn't surprised by the 35%. Most people like to put themselves, I'm not lower class, I'm not upper class, somewhere in the middle. Okay. But do we think that earning 4,000 zlotys a month puts you in the middle class in this country?
What do teachers earn?
Less.
Actually, I think their statistics kind of suggest something else, that there are a lot of people who earn more but don't consider themselves middle class. So a lot of people are earning 7, 8, 9,000 but don't count themselves among the middle class. They still think they're, a little bit lower than middle.
Well, yeah.
It also comes to the whole question of what is middle class. And there's so many definitions, economically speaking, socially speaking.
Well, I'm asking you, what do you think is middle class? In terms of money.
I think this is very, very interesting, because I suspect that you're kind of tending towards what I consider to be the American definition of middle class, which is entirely income-based,
right.
i.e., if there's a spread between low income, middle income, and high income, the middle class are the people on the whatever the middle income is determined to be. Whereas as an Englishman, I can tell you that being middle class means that, you don't need to wash your hands after work, but you're not kind of like massively endowed with lands and titles and so forth. The bourgeoisie.
So in other words, you inherit it.
No. It's the professional classes, if you like.
So you have a job, maybe not earning a lot, but you have a job to get you by.
A white-collar job, really.
Exactly, but it's not a job where, you're working 9 to 5 and banging away at some kind of machine.
So a mechanic in England,
and you lose
for example,
your pesky regional accent, of course.
In England, a mechanic or some kind of person who works with his hands, gets his hands dirty, who makes X amount of pounds, whatever. Let's say it's twice as much as somebody who works in an office, but that guy who earns half as much as the mechanic is still middle class, whereas the mechanic is lower class?
But not lower class, it's working class.
Bizarre.
Working class. It's like the contrast between the social understanding of classes and the economical understanding of classes.
What would you say, I'm looking for a number here, in Poland, to belong to the upper class? What do you think that income
economically speaking
starts with? Yeah, economically, salary.
I would say somebody earning over 15 or 20,000 would be upper class in that sense.
So you think the middle class stretches to 15 or 20,000?
I think in a very broad definition, I think the middle class is very wide, and I can see it. Somebody who's earning 4,000 considers themselves middle class, but I would say that stretches up to like 15, 20,000 as well. 4,000
just seems really low. Maybe even if you have a what do you call it, a 2-income family, right? And you're both making 4, so that's 8,000. Even if you make 8,000 here, you're never going to buy a house. You're never going to have a house and a car, which I think is a reasonable and standard measure of being in the middle class.
But I would say also, for me, a requisite of being in the middle classes means you don't have to worry about shelter and food and paying, and thinking like, okay, do I pay my water bill this weekend or this week, or do I pay my electric bill this week? If you have all your basic needs taken care of and you have a little bit left over for expenditures that aren't necessarily necessary, a little bit of like lenient income, then I would say that's already a middle class. That's a very wide definition, I admit, but I would say that can already count as middle class.
Interesting. Let's move on to something that comes from your world, Dr. Mike. Interesting. Let's move on.
I'm saying like you don't need to survive off of any kind of, say, government subsidies or payments or welfare or anything like that.
Let's move on to something that comes from your world, Dr. Mike. We've talked about this before. This is something that pops up from time to time. Unfortunately, it's one of the many professions that either threaten to go on strike or actually go on strike. This time it's the nurses. It's like a cyclical thing. The nurses and the bus drivers and the miners in Poland, they all take turns striking, basically, and it's the nurses' turn. You know something about the world of government healthcare and whatnot. Tell us what's going on, what they're striking about. I guess it's money, and just generally the situation here.
Well, yes, this past week, nurses went on strike. It was a warning strike, so they didn't actually step away from patients. Nurses that weren't working that day went and protested in major cities, in Warsaw as well. And nurses that were working had armbands on and signs, etc. And of course, it has to do with pay and how much they're earning right now. The government has said that they're going to introduce a new payment scheme, which they say will mean nurses will be earning more money, while nurses and the nurses union say, like, well, this payment scheme is basically suggesting that the minimum pay will be calculated based on what is the current minimum legal pay in the country, but the way the government is counting it might actually be lower. gets kind of complicated. And also nurses who already earn more are saying, well, it's kind of not fair that we're earning more, but we're not going to have any protected payments.
Wait, you got any info on average wages for nurses?
It's all over the place. An average nurse who starts after, because you can have different types of nurses as well. That's the thing. This is a very broad group.
Yeah.
You can be a nurse without having tertiary education. Basically, you finish kind of like a nursing high school or a vocational school for nursing, and then you're earning cash in hand, $2,000 as low as $2,500.
Well, I'll tell you why I'm asking. This is going back to our previous story. Can we all agree that being a nurse is a solid middle-class job? I mean, I think it is, right? Maybe you won't get rich.
In the UK, I think they might consider it working class.
Maybe you won't get rich, but in terms, I'm thinking.
Well, you have to be a graduate to be a nurse in the UK now. I'm thinking in terms of
income. This should be a middle-class job. And these numbers that you're using, Dr. Mike, this puts them just barely at the bottom level border of being middle class.
They're barely at the bottom. That is true. But when they start at those unqualified, minimally qualified ones. But if you go, you can also get a tertiary education for nursing specialist, master's degrees, etc. And those, they already start off earning a little bit more. We're not talking, $20,000 a month or anything like that, but $4,000, $5,000, $6,000.
Right, so what's the high end? Well-educated,
the
field with the highest demand.
Personally, I know some nurses that after taxes are earning about $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 a month.
8, 9, 10 is the high end.
Yeah, that's the high end of nurses. The problem with nursing is after a certain degree in the field, you can't earn much more. But the upper end is $10,000, and you can start earning that, before you're 40.
Are you sympathetic to nurses when it comes to the strike?
Only to some degree. I do believe that nurses starting out are paid a lot less than they probably should be. But nurses, with 5 years of experience, any type of specialization, there is opportunity there where they can earn more. And if they're not earning more, it's usually more due to their own choices or what kind of hours they take. I mean, some nurses complain like, oh, I'm working 3 different jobs. Yes, but you're not working on your specialization, your qualifications, your abilities. You're just working at the bottom tier in a lot of places.
And just to clarify, we're talking about nurses who work for the government. These are not nurses in private clinics and private hospitals.
Exactly, yes, that's another thing. So that's a whole other issue. So there are a lot of nurses, but they don't get qualifications, so they're kind of glorified maids, to be quite honest.
That sounds a little harsh.
It is harsh, but then you have nurses, that actually do go to university, do degrees, and they're medical specialists. And that's another thing in Polish culture when it comes to medical specializations. We use the term nurse for a very wide group. So nurses can be somebody who's just almost providing food and cleanliness to the patient, to somebody who's actually providing medical treatment.
And standing there when the doctor's performing heart surgery or something like that.
In the media, it's always that top nurse who's the one presented, while it's the ones on the other end of the spectrum who complain about the pay. I think, we need to recognize
different levels of
exactly
duties and obligations and skills and whatnot.
The only big problem is in Poland, nurses are often seen as being at the lower end of that scale, even though a lot of them are in the middle or at the top and should be paid or financially compensated.
Josh, sympathetic to the nurses?
I don't have much knowledge about this. I think I'm quite happy to go along with what Mike said. If the people at the lower end are not being paid very well, then they should probably be paid more. If the people at the higher end are being paid all right, well, good for them.
Poland also has a situation right now with nurses because even of the qualified ones, a lot of them are retiring earlier. There's also the issue of a lot of the well-qualified younger ones have actually moved abroad because for more or less the same job, they have higher standards of employment and being paid more in Germany or in the UK or in France, etc. So Poland has basically a nurse drain going on right now, and younger people don't want to go into that field. So compared to the rest of Europe, we have a lot less of nursing staff. And, in the medical field, you need not only doctors and people who can diagnose, but people also treat and look after patients. It's part of the system. And Poland is really in a situation right now that's not looking good.
I'm sympathetic to them because I think it is scandalous for someone who does a job that's so important and they get paid 3,500 zlotys. That's nowhere near enough. I agree. At the same time, though, I mean, when you start your training as a nurse, whatever training that might be, you know how much nurses get paid. nobody's in a position where they're surprised when they get the job offer and they say, wait, how much are you offering me? You know this long before you get in the game, okay? So if the money is not what you want, then do something else.
Well, isn't that exactly the situation we have, though? I mean, if Mike's saying that we have a shortage of new entrants into nursing, it's because it's not seen as an attractive position.
Yeah, but you can say the same thing to the people who are nurses now. They knew what they were getting into going into it. So I'm sympathetic, but again, is anybody surprised when they find out that nurses earn whatever they earn? Of course, you look into this long before you commit to it as a career.
Plus, I think I need to add one more thing here that I've heard from nurses in Poland, especially those who have gone abroad to work. Financial issues aside, there's also a cultural issue in lots of hospitals and healthcare institutions where nurses are looked down on. In many countries, nurses are considered "quote unquote" part of the team.
Right.
Everybody has their role to play. While in Poland, unfortunately, it still seems that the doctor is on top and the nurse is kind
so to speak.
It's underneath.
that kind of hospital. Huh?
I'm talking about my home life. Basically, the situation is that the doctor, whoever's the medical professional in that sense, gives the orders, and the nurse is there just as kind of like the working class to do what they're told to do and to look down on. They're not respected in any way. And lots of nurses, once they realize in other countries that they're more respected, they're considered part of an institution, prefer that. So even if they would be paid the same amount of money in Poland, the culture in Poland puts nurses right at the bottom.
And argue with that. I mean, again, sympathetic, but this is not the kind of thing that's fixed with a law. If it's cultural, it's cultural. So, there's a deeper... It requires a deeper fix.
Well, we need change, don't we? And we need it now.
I don't know how to fix that, but this comes up every couple of years. The nurses want more money. The public transport people want more money. The miners want more money. And again, I want to see them earn it. I want to, they're probably worth it, but you know how much you're going to get paid, but long before you say, I'm going to go to nursing school. I mean, come on.
That's true. It's last 2 years, I think the average was about 10,000 nurses a year retiring. Well, it's about 5,000 young nurses graduating into the nursing
that's a problem.
Specialization. And not all of those actually became nurses in Poland. Lots of them worked in other jobs.
And we have a aging population that's going to require even more nurses. So it's going to get worse before it gets better for sure.
In Poland is in her mid-50s, which is close to retirement age.
Let's move on to the sugar tax. Came into effect January 1st of this year. So we have, not quite 6 full months of results, but we got some stats from the government this week that give us an early indication of its impact. According to the government, purchases of the sugary drinks that were targeted by the sugar tax have fallen by 23%. That is a massive 23%. I can't talk. 23% of a huge number is still a huge number, right? Is this a success because people are drinking less sugary drinks? Is it a disaster because the government isn't collecting as much tax money? How are we supposed to look at this?
I think for the government, they knew going in that it would be a success either way because they can say, oh, less people are drinking sugary drinks. It's a success because we wanted people to be healthy. Or if the same amount of people were drinking sugary drinks, they would be collecting tax revenue on this. So they could say it's a success in that way. It was a win-win situation for the government, though I do believe that they were assuming more people will be buying carbonated sugary beverages, so they would collect more tax revenue that they could spend on whatever it is.
Has anyone seen a reasonable explanation of why the sugar-free version of drinks are still taxed?
No, there is none.
I'm looking for this.
When they introduced this, when they talked about this tax a few years ago, there was no mention of, say, sugar-free beverages.
Kind of exposes their motives a little bit,
yes,
I think.
And at first I assumed, okay, that means everybody's going to switch to the sugar-free version of things. But no, they said the argument for the government was like, well, sugar is bad, so we need to limit that and we'll tax it. But they taxed beverages that were also sweetened by artificial sweeteners, which makes absolutely no sense in that with that argument.
So 23% reduction. Basically, we're talking about carbonated drinks, Coke and Pepsi, essentially. 24% decrease in flavored waters. 10% decrease in iced teas. And a similar decrease for energy drinks, which were also taxed. And so I guess, Dr. Mike, this means the National Health Service should be flooded with plenty of money now, and they won't need any more money for anything. They'll be set financially, right?
Yeah. It's like when Poland's...
wrong.
Yeah.
I think for me, the sugar tax is the only thing worse than the sugar tax is the Sunday shopping ban. That pisses me off pisses me off more than anything else, and the sugar tax is number 2. If we're making a list of sins of the government,
I don't agree with the state imposing those things, but I can almost agree with the Sunday shopping ban to some extent.
You're dead to me.
I think there's a lot of debate there that can be made, but the sugar tax for me is one of those things like it's hypocritical on so many levels. And, I'm also annoyed by the fact that, I used to walk in, you would see that large bottle of your favorite carbonated beverage and you would grab it. It used to be 2 liters. Now that large bottle
it's 1.5. It was 1.8, then it was 1.5. Soon it'll be 1 and, the same price basically. So it's outrageous, but I just don't like the idea of the government saying, we don't like you for drinking that, so we're going to make you pay more.
I know you came in today actually clutching a can of a popular carbonated beverage in a red and a characteristic red and white can. Well, I don't want to give away too much. And I was kind of surprised that you weren't mugged on the way in, given that you were visibly carrying expensive contraband.
Valuable, exactly. I got the 0 sugar version, but I paid the with sugar tax for reasons that are known only to God, apparently. Well, anyway,
what his kind of sidekick Yaroslav.
What else can we complain about here? Oh yeah, check this out. A survey this week. Is it really a survey? It's not. It's a study. Sorry, it's a study by an organization called TomTom. Not sure what that's all about.
GPS.
TomTom. They measure traffic. They have something called a traffic index, and they publish the results of the 2020 traffic index. They looked at statistics from 416 cities from 57 countries on 6 continents, and they measure how bad the traffic is. And they measure it in terms of
pretty okay in Antarctica.
Measure it in terms of the number of days they have with low traffic, and how much of your life you waste in traffic. And of course, they know it's not fair to put all cities in the same basket. Some cities are mega cities like in Moscow and Mexico City and New York City and Tokyo, etc. Well, among cities of 800,000 people or less. 800,000 people or less. 4 of the top 5 worst cities on the planet are in Poland. Number 1, Łódź. Number 2, Krakow. Number 3, Wrocław. Number 5, Poznan. The only non-Polish city at number 4 was Edinburgh. Edinburgh. So, Dr. Mike, how do we, 4 of the top 5, surely, this is more than coincidence. There is something going on that puts Poland at the top of a very, very bad list.
I'm a little surprised, especially considering the fact that, in 2020, there was almost no traffic in Krakow. I mean, I live in the center of town, and it was like that. As much as I hated all the lockdown procedures, I like the fact that in spring 2020, it was eerily quiet outside my apartment building. There were no cars. It only started up basically now in the last couple of weeks, couple of months. So I don't know how they calculated this. I mean, this is probably a comparative kind of study. So every country had less traffic than usual in this time. So in that sense, Krakow was on top of the list. But I also think the fact that like a lot of Polish cities, they're medieval cities, very centralized.
Łódź?
Good point. But still, they're all very centralized cities.
Well, I think my theory is that after 40 odd years under the oppressive Soviet yoke, that's the YOKE spelling of that word. Around other parts of the world, people were kind of developing, investing in infrastructure, and getting more and more cars. Now, of course, Poland has been very much catching up in the terms of getting more and more cars, but what is lacking is the road infrastructure. And I mean, this is well known. It's improved slightly, but I would confidently assert that the number of cars on the road has increased far more than the numbers of miles or kilometers of good quality highway, for example.
No doubt about it. Poland has long been among the biggest markets for new car sales. I think over the last 15, 20 years, Poland is consistently at or near the top of the list of the market with the most new cars sold. There's so much pent up demand here, and you're right, Josh, when you say it is a legacy of communism. It absolutely is, and I see this very often when I'm walking in my own neighborhood where I live. There are apartment buildings that were built probably, I would say, late 70s. Early 80s at the very latest. And there are 4 buildings that are identical, and each of them has 70 apartments. And I know that because the sign outside the Klatka says, apartment 1 to 15, 16 to 30, et cetera, et cetera. So each building has 70 apartments. And in front of each building, there are 8 parking spaces. Which in 1978 probably made perfect sense, right?
Yeah, the guy who lived in the penthouse, with his kind of fleet of sills.
Exactly, because as we've talked about many times before, when things were built at that time, they were built with the assumption that 5% of people would have a car or whatever it is. And that's the physical world that we've inherited, right? There's not space.
They have stables as well.
There's not. They should. There's no more space to make more parking spaces or roads. And here we are, 40 years later, and suddenly, I don't know what the stat is now for car ownership, but it's a hell of a lot more than it was in 1978. If I had to guess, I'd say probably half of all people have their own car now. And the road infrastructure and the parking infrastructure is comically inadequate. There's no space to build more parking or roads in lots of parts of the city. And there's no solution here. We're just going to see more and more cars on the road because you can build all the public transport you want. Krakow can build its metro, pre-metro, whatever. It's still not going to stop people from wanting their own car. Like it or not, agree or not, people want their own car. Well, I think, and the statistics show that.
I think, in fact, what the city is doing, which is brutal from the perspective of a car driver, but I think actually it's the only feasible solution, is, as we've discussed before, strangling those handful of broad roads that go in and out of the city centre by making them single lane in each direction only. Thus, it may take some time, but if you really, really, really got to drive into the city centre, then it's going to take you a long time.
We always focus on the city centre, and of course it's important, but the vast majority of all traffic is well beyond.
Well, no, this is also true. I mean, there is,
and even those roads
not
are choked
adequate.
Too.
There is no ring road, for example, around the entire
they're
city.
Working on that. It's called the S7.
But go drive on Novohudska. Go drive on what's it called? Alea. Go drive on Kamienskiego, whatever. It's a nightmare. I mean, a drive that will take you 15 minutes if you drive in the middle of the night will take you an hour and 15 minutes if you go between 2 and 7 p.m. It's unbelievable. And just to add one more depressing aspect to this hopeless situation, it has to be pointed out that pedestrians don't help. Now, it's not our fault. We're all pedestrians sometimes. We have to cross the street. We have to walk down the street. It's just how things are. But if you watch the flow of traffic, one person crossing the street can ruin any kind of momentum that the traffic builds up. Because, we should have a word for that process where, when one car slows down, the car behind it has to slow down, the car behind that has to slow down, et cetera. And it takes a long time for everybody to speed up again to normal speed. So pedestrians will kill whatever flow we manage to build up with traffic anyway. I just don't see a way out. It's never going to get better. Basically, we're screwed when it comes to traffic.
And it is, and I mean, I know we've discussed the recent change in the laws, which are now obliging people to stop at zebra crossings to enable pedestrians to cross. And I have to say, I mean, of course, I'm in this immediate locality, kind of Dietler, Krakowska, those streets, and you can be hovering within a metre or two of the zebra crossing, and car drivers will be looking at you and slowing down, assuming that they're moving quickly enough to be able to slow down. And I'm talking even about big, black tinted glass Audi SUVs. So that's. I mean, from a pedestrian's perspective, that's very, very welcome. But you're thinking,
I appreciate that right now.
But they've probably spent. It's probably taken them 20 minutes to get from Monte Cassino to.
Well, I can tell you because you guys don't drive, but I drive quite a bit in town now, and I know from the driver's perspective, yes, they do want to murder you with their own hands when you step out in front of them. And as you said, they've just spent an hour sitting in bumper to bumper traffic. They see a clear road, and there's Josh. He wants to cross the street, and they have to stop and wait for Josh or John or Dr. White to cross the street. It's infuriating.
Well, I like to show some consideration. I mean, if I see that the lights have just turned green and then there's kind of space and everything, then I do not want to step out in front of the road.
No, I try to be considerate as well. As I walk up to the crosswalk when I see that the traffic permits that. I'm not one of those people that jumps out and head whatever it's.
Stop, goddamn you! I want to cross the road.
No, there is no solution to this.
And I also, whenever I cross the street, I try to speed up a little bit. I'm not going to.
Oh, thank you. Then you're one of the good ones too, because the ones who take their sweet time are the ones that I really want to get out of my car and just kill.
They're usually on scooters.
Yeah, and those too. But yeah, there's no solution to this. It's never going to get better. Sorry, end of story. I mean, the traffic is what it is.
Yeah.
there's no way to make it better, and you think we have a lot of cars now, yeah, just wait. It's going to get more and more every year. And I have a friend who recently moved away from Krakow. He moved from here to another city, a city with about 150,000, almost 200,000 people. And he says it's one of the first things he noticed. He can drive from one side of the city to the other in about 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. And, he's never afraid to jump in the car to go here or there because, he doesn't have to think, well, what time, how long is this going to take me? What time am I going to get home if I commit to this drive? No, not an issue at all. And when you get to where you're going, there's plenty of parking and it's just a different reality.
If you're a commuter in Los Angeles, say, I mean, you're where there are, vast quantities of freeways and roads and everything like that. And they're still awful.
Too many cars. I mean, I don't know so much about LA. Actually, I don't care. Everybody in LA.
Well, no, right. But I wasn't asking if you cared.
No, I don't care at all about LA.
I mean, if nuclear bombs go off randomly,
that's fine with me. No problem. Let's sneak in one more thing here before we wrap it up. Poland's oldest person, a young lady, reached the age of 115. I had her name here a second ago. She's got a rather unusual name.
Let
me get her name in here.
No, actually, you want to wish them.
Tekla Unevich, 115 years old. God bless her. She's the oldest person in Poland, from Gliwice. Gliwice is not a city I would associate with old age, I have to say.
Well, what do you associate Gliwice?
The air in Gliwice. I've been to Gliwice.
They have like a radio antenna, which is actually the pretext that Hitler used to invade Poland.
That's true.
Right.
Yeah. So this was part of Germany back then.
Silesia generally just don't associate with old age. Maybe I should go. I haven't been there in a while. Maybe I should go update my impression of Silesia. But 115, Dr. Mike. Isn't it interesting the number of times you see interviews with people who reach this age? Sometimes, I don't know, Japanese or French or Italian or whatever. It's funny how often they list that a nice daily shot of vodka or whiskey or something is part of their routine.
It is true. I mean, I don't know about her case in specific.
An unfiltered cigarette.
Yeah. Is there any medical facts behind that?
Basically, statistically speaking, if you reach 90 and you're quote unquote healthy, you don't have any, then you're likely to live a lot more longer as well. That's kind of the age 90, where if you're fat or skinny, whatever, if you've reached 90 and you don't have any significant like health problems, you're probably going to live another 10, 15 more years. So that's part of it. But, to get to 100, 115, that's basically genetics. That's luck. I mean,
is the record, is it 120? Did we reach 120? What's the record? A French woman.
I thought it was like just a little 126. I think it was.
No, 126 sounds too much.
Was that she's dead now? I think. Wasn't it like kind of she like knew Van Gogh or something like that?
115. Well, anyway, happy birthday to her, and we look forward to talking about her next year when she turns 116. All right, we're going to bring things to a close. Thanks for listening, everybody. KrakCast.pl is the website. Check out everything there. Hit the donate button if you like what we're doing. Don't forget to share, like, subscribe, follow. What else is there? You know what to do. Anyway, feed the big retweet. So leave a comment, leave a review, whatever. Feed the algorithm in the sky. Help us out. We appreciate it, and we'll catch you next time on the KrakCast.